Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be tackling a topic that you might think you know a lot about already, but trust me, you don't. We're doing a deep dive into distracted driving.
Oh, yeah. Distracted driving.
Yeah, and I actually thought I knew a lot about this topic, but the research that we have in front of us, this stack of articles, I mean, it's fascinating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and just to give you a little taste of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be looking at how distraction has played a role in train crashes, how it leads to something called pedestrian blindness, and even how smartwatches are making the problem worse. So one thing that really surprised me is that this isn't just about teenagers texting anymore. I mean, we all know that's a huge problem.
Right.
But this goes way beyond that. It affects all of us, you know?
Yeah, it's true. This deep dive shows that it affects everyone in ways that we might not even think about, like just in our daily lives.
Exactly. You know, picture this. You're stuck in traffic, you're late for a meeting, and you just have to send that one quick email. Or maybe you're driving the kids around town, trying to manage a million things at once, and you think, oh, I can just make a quick call. But the World Health Organization, they have some pretty sobering statistics. They say that using a cell phone while driving, it makes you 4 times more likely to be in a crash.
4 times.
4 times.
Wow. And, you know, that's just the accidents that are reported. Think about all those close calls, you know, those fender benders that maybe don't get officially reported, but they happen because someone's glancing at their phone. And we also have to remember, it's not just about driving. Distracted walking is becoming a huge problem, and we don't even have the data to really understand the full extent of it.
Right.
It's really everywhere.
It's everywhere. And, you know, you start to see how our brains are almost wired for distraction these days, right? But here's the thing. It goes way beyond just our phones. Like, we found this really interesting study about smartwatches.
Smartwatches?
Yeah, and it turns out that smartwatches can actually be even more distracting than phones while you're driving.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they talk about this thing called social cluelessness, which I thought was fascinating. So basically, imagine you're on a video call with someone while you're driving, right?
Okay.
They have no idea that you're navigating rush hour traffic, or maybe you're trying parallel park or something. So as the driver, you're trying to process their conversation, you're trying to stay in your lane, you're trying to manage the car, and it all just adds up to this cognitive overload.
I see. That makes sense. Wow.
I never really thought about it that way before, you know? And this is making me realize just how much we underestimate the dangers. I bet most people don't even consider those fancy in-car infotainment systems as a risk, but even those can contribute to distraction. It's crazy.
It really is. And I think the reason this is such a problem is because it's so deeply rooted in how our brains work. You know, we like to think that we're really good at multitasking, but the research shows that multitasking is really a myth. Our brains just aren't designed to focus effectively on multiple things at the same time. We might think we're juggling it all, but in reality, we're just switching between tasks really quickly, which makes us less efficient, and more importantly, it increases our chances of making mistakes.
So it's less about juggling and more about fumbling, huh?
Exactly. And driving, it requires the opposite of multitasking. It demands what we call unitasking. Complete, focused attention on the road.
Right. You need all your senses, right? You need all your cognitive abilities to react to those changing situations out there on the road.
You need to be completely present.
So driving is like that one friend who demands all your attention, no multitasking allowed. But I'm curious, how does distraction actually show up while we're driving? Like, what does that look like?
Well, you can think about distractions in terms of our senses. Right? So there are visual distractions, things that take our eyes off the road. There are manual distractions, things that require us to take our hands off the wheel. And then there are cognitive distractions. Those are the things that pull our minds away from driving.
Okay, so is it fair to say then that texting while driving hits the trifecta?
It definitely does. Texting hits all 3. You're visually looking at your phone, you're manually typing, and you're cognitively engaged in a conversation. It's really the worst possible thing you can do while driving.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, now shifting gears a little bit, have you ever heard of the invisible gorilla experiment?
Oh, the invisible gorilla. Yeah, that's a classic study. It really shows how our brains can miss important information even when we think we're paying attention.
Right. Can you remind me how that experiment works again?
Sure. So basically, they show people a video, and they ask them to count how many times a basketball is passed between players. But here's the catch. In the middle of the video, someone wearing a gorilla suit walks right through the scene.
And people don't see it.
A surprising number of people miss it completely. They're so focused on counting the passes that they're literally blind to the gorilla.
That's wild.
It is wild, but it really illustrates what we call inattentional blindness.
Inattentional blindness. So you're saying when we're distracted while driving, it's kind of like our field of vision narrows and we become less aware of what's happening around us.
Exactly. We might miss a pedestrian, a cyclist, or even another car. It's like we have blinders on.
That's a pretty scary thought.
It is scary. And there's also another phenomenon called inattentional deafness.
Inattentional deafness. So like we can't hear things.
Yeah. Like if you're talking on the phone especially, it makes you less aware of the sounds around you. You might not hear a car horn or a siren. I actually almost walked into a pole the other day because I was so engrossed in a podcast I was listening to.
Wow.
Yeah, it can happen to anyone. It's like your brain is so focused on one thing that it literally tunes out everything else.
That is scary. So it seems like we're way more vulnerable to distraction than we realize. And this is making me think about all those people walking around with their heads buried in their phones, not even paying attention to where they're going.
You're right. That's another growing concern. They call it ambulatory cell phone injuries. People are tripping, bumping into things, even walking into traffic because they're not paying attention.
So those people walking around completely glued to their phones, they're actually putting themselves at risk of getting hurt. I guess inattentional blindness applies to walking too, huh?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
They might not see uneven pavement or obstacles in their path, and it's all because their brains are somewhere else.
It's like their brains are off in the digital world somewhere. This makes you realize how much we rely on our senses to navigate the world safely, and when we're distracted, it's like we're operating with blinders on. But are people walking with their phones really that much more at risk than, say, someone listening to music?
Well, there was one study that found that pedestrians on their phones were actually significantly less likely to cross the road safely, even compared to those listening to music.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it shows how cognitive distraction really impacts our decision-making and our reaction times.
Wow. So it's not just about what we see or hear, it's about how our brains are processing information.
Exactly.
So it's clear that distraction is a multifaceted problem with far-reaching consequences. But are there any solutions out there? I mean, it feels like it's just such a universal human habit these days, right? Like, is there any hope for us?
Well, it might feel like a losing battle, but there are some really creative solutions being implemented around the world, and they're actually proving to be quite effective.
Oh, really? Like, what? Give me some hope here.
Well, there's this Zero Accident Day campaign in India that was really successful. And it wasn't just about handing out tickets.
Oh, okay. So how do they approach it?
What's so interesting about this campaign is that they really tapped into cultural values and community spirit.
Yeah.
They created this massive awareness campaign aimed at educating people and shifting their mindset towards road safety. It was really about fostering a shared commitment to safety, and it worked.
Wow. I love that. It wasn't about punishment. It was about inspiring people to be more mindful. That gives me some hope. What about other approaches? Are there any examples of like creative solutions in other parts of the world?
Oh, absolutely. Do you remember those edgy signboards in California? Like, heads up, cross the street,
Yeah.
then update Facebook.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
funny and relatable.
Yeah, they're attention grabbing.
Yeah, and then there are those no selfie zones in Mumbai. They're
Ugh.
so direct and humorous.
I love those. It seems like humor can be a really powerful tool.
Yeah. It's about meeting people where they are and using humor and relatable messaging to really get their attention. And sometimes a change in infrastructure can help too.
Right. Speaking of infrastructure, I read that some European cities are getting super creative with their infrastructure to combat distracted walking. What are they doing?
Some cities are embedding traffic lights right in the sidewalks and installing LED strips in crosswalks. It's a subtle way to alert pedestrians who are glued to their phones.
I love that, like a gentle nudge in the right direction. It's encouraging to see that people are taking this issue seriously and coming up with innovative solutions.
And it's not just about physical infrastructure. Technology itself can be part of the solution.
Oh, really? I thought technology was the problem. How can technology help us combat distraction?
Well, think about artificial intelligence. AI is being used to develop systems that can monitor driver behavior and provide real-time feedback. There are also advancements in vehicle design, like soft bumpers and modified front ends, that can help reduce the severity of pedestrian injuries if a collision does occur.